In today's lesson, we are going to use a diagram to find the unit rate. Our goal is to use a diagram to represent a unit rate. So you may ask yourself, how do you simplify a unit rate? Well, remember, a unit rate already is in simplest form. But a common mistake is forgetting that the unit rate is always compared to 1. Sometimes students will think that if a ratio is in simplest form, you found the unit rate. For example, 30 miles in 17 minutes. This is, of course, not a unit rate because it doesn't compare it to 1. Another common mistake, a scenario like 30 miles in 60 minutes. Students will often say that the unit rate is 1 mile per 2 minutes, whereas in reality, your unit rate always needs to be over 1. So for example, it would be 2 minutes per mile. And while that is correct, keep in mind there is another possible answer for this problem. You can also word it, and the more common way of wording it is 1/2 mile per minute. So make sure you're avoiding those common mistakes. So, what is a unit rate? Well, let's review. A rate is a ratio that is used to compare different kinds of quantities. A unit rate is the ratio of two measurements in which the second term is compared to 1. The really important idea here is that you've reduced it to something over 1. It's not in simplest form. It needs to be over 1. So for example, if your ratio is 1 to 2, it's in simplest form, but the unit rate would be 1/2 to 1, or you could write it as a decimal to 1. If you need to review different ways of writing ratios, make sure you go back to the previous tutorial and revisit that. Another important thing to note is that if you ever have, for example, let's say we have 1/2 mile per minute, it's a good idea to insert that you know that per minute can mean per 1 minute. Anytime you see miles per hour or per minute, per quantity, that's often a good indication that you're dealing with a unit rate. Especially in word problems, it's something to look out for. Let's look at an example. Cookies. Actually, cupcakes. Layla spends 4 minutes decorating 8 cupcakes. How many cupcakes did she decorate per minute? Again, we have that word per minute, which literally means per 1 minute. So, we're going to use a diagram to represent that. So, we have 8 cupcakes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 total. And I know she spent 4 minutes. Well, I have 1, 2, 3, and 4 minutes. So I can see that when I divide this evenly, 1, 2, 3, 4, I can see that Layla decorated 2 cupcakes per minute. So for every 1 minute, Layla decorated 2 cupcakes. So my unit rate is 2 cupcakes per minute, which means my ratio is 2 over 1. And remember, it's very important that you have the 1 in your denominator. And when you word it, it should be the last part of your words. For example, 2 cupcakes per minute. 2 cupcakes for 1 minute. Let's look at another example. 40-yard dash. Vanessa ran 40 yards in 5 seconds. How many yards did she run each second? So we have our 40-yard dash, and we know it took her 5 seconds total to run it. And in this case, instead of using the word per second, I used each. That's another clue word that can help you. So we have 40 yards in 5 seconds. So I have my diagram from 0 to 40, and my number line from 0 to 5. Now I can use that to draw a diagram that breaks this up into 5 equal parts. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So I know my first diagram is going to be at 8. My second one is going to be 8 more, which is at 16. My next one, 8 more, is going to be at 24. Then we have 8 more, giving me 32. And my last 8, which lands me right at 40. So I can see that in 1 second, Vanessa ran 8 yards. So that would be 8 yards per second. In other words, she ran 8 yards each second. So I have my unit rate, which is 8 over 1. 8 yards per second. So I hope that you realize that drawing a diagram can really help you visualize complex situations. I know that you can just divide to get a unit rate, and in the next lesson you are going to do that. But I really want you to understand what this means and why it works. So now it's your turn. So in this problem, you're going to use a diagram to determine the unit rate. Let's look at our situation. Juan walked 9 miles in 3 hours. How many miles did he travel per hour? So, you're going to use a diagram to determine the unit rate. I don't just want your answer. I want you to write a diagram as we did in this problem and this problem. So think about how you can visualize 9 miles and how you can show the unit rate. And then of course you can write your answer underneath your diagram. Go ahead and take a minute to pause this tutorial and figure this problem out. In this lesson, you have learned to create a unit rate by using a diagram. One thing I want to reiterate is that it's really important that you understand that there are 2 unit rates. Going back to the cupcake example, where you have 2 cupcakes per minute, another way, of course, determining the unit rate would to say that it takes a half a minute to decorate 1 cupcake. So remember, there's always 2 different answers to determine the unit rate, and showing a diagram can really help you determine that. So another great job today, and I think you're ready to go on to much more complex problems. Great job again.